Hey, and welcome to Snarky and Modern's Week 1 Embroidery Sal. Let's get started. The first stitch we're going to be talking about is backstitch. Backstitch is a way to outline a shape, so you'll start at the beginning of your line by going up through your fabric, creating your first stitch. Then on the back side, you'll come back up from under and take your needle back down through the same hole that your first stitch ended in, creating an unbroken line. And you'll just repeat this process going all the way down your line to outline your shape, just backing in one stitch directly into the previous one by using that same hole. For our sal, the entire manner is done in backstitch. So I'm using a uniform stitch size to outline the shape. The windows are also done in backstitch. And the bricks are either single stitch back stitches or kind of layered back stitch to make them a little bit wider for those bricks. Then we have brick stitch. Brick stitch is very similar to back stitch. What it is it's basically used to fill in a shape by using back stitch in a layered sense, like you're layering bricks. So here I technically have 3 rows of brick stitch is how I think about it. But it looks like a brick wall. And what you want to pay attention to is making sure that your stitches are staggered, so none of those spaces between the stitches that are the holes match up. So here I'm going to come up through the fabric in the middle next to my previous stitch, and then down next to the stitch that's below that to create my first layered brick. And then I'll repeat that process following the shape. Being sure to taper my stitches. I can either use the same hole for that or by stopping the stitch for the thinner areas as opposed to the thicker areas. And you'll use this to fill in the entire middle part of the quill. And again, just focus on keeping your stitches uniform in length. Our next stitch is satin stitch. I have these guidelines in this circle shape to help keep my stitches the same direction and to help me fill in section by section. Satin stitch should look like a piece of satin has been laid on your work. I'm using all 6 strands here in this demonstration, making sure that my stitch is nice and straight. Started from the top, went down at the bottom. My next stitch is going to come up parallel to that stitch, right next to it. Not sharing the same hole, just in the hole that's almost directly next to the one that previous stitch is inhabiting. You want 0 gaps. If you feel like you have a gap, you can come back up next to your stitch if there's room and lay down a stitch, because you just really don't want any gaps in your satin. You also want to be aware if your thread is twisting to dangle your needle down so that thread untwists itself so you don't have any twists in your satin stitch as well. And I'll just continue this to fill in the shape. Here we're going to do that for our feather of the quill. Again, I'm putting in these simple guidelines with my heat erasable pin, so that way I can kind of visualize which way my stitches are going to go, starting at the top of my shape and going back down at the bottom next to my brick stitch. Satin stitch, you can share holes. For example, I'm kind of filling in a triangle, so one part is more narrow than another part. So to help combat that, I may have a few stitches share the same hole, so that way I can fit all the satin stitches I need to fill in this area. And I'll just keep that up the entire time. You can also outline your shape first in backstitch before you fill it in with satin stitch, and this helps you better fill in the shape sometimes. So if you're struggling to fill in the shape or struggling to keep your satin stitch even, I recommend using backstitch as an outline and then filling in over that backstitch area. So again, now that I have it outlined, I'm going to fill it in with my satin stitch, just going over that backstitch that I put in. The next stitch is stem stitch. For this one, you're going to come up from the bottom of your line, and you're going to hold your thread with your opposite hand that you're using the needle, and then come up in the middle of that stitch without pulling it through, and then let go of that loop, and then you can pull the thread all the way through, and that's going to cause it to twist. For stem stitch, you just want to make sure that your twists are all the same way. So keep holding that loop to the right of your line like I am here. You can hold it to the left. I think that is called outline stitch if it's to the left, and it's just slightly less twisted looking is what I've heard from other people describe it. To me, they look super similar. So whether you go left or right, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Just make sure that that twist is going the same way. So for this, we have a couple of vines. You can continue to work on the lower vines that are on our bookmarker too if you would like. I'm just going to do the top two just so I don't have to move my hoop because I think it's annoying. But you're more than welcome to move your hoop down and then back up. But for week 1 for myself, I'm just going to fill in the top 2 vines. So again, this is stem stitch, keeping my stitches the same size, my loop on the same side, of my vine for both the top and the bottom. To finish the stem stitch, what you're going to do is the last stitch that you do when you come up in the middle or in that same hole for the end, you're going to go back down in the same hole that you're to finish off that last stitch. That way every stitch has a twist in it. If you don't, it's really not that noticeable. It'll just technically be like an untwisted stitch at the end. So I use the same hole to give myself that twist. And this is my finish. Ta-da! Happy stitching!